This is NC Spin, an unrehearsed discussion on issues of interest to North Carolinians. Now, here is your moderator, Tom Campbell.
Welcome. You've heard and read the spin the media and the politicians have put on the issues of the day. To get the correct spin on what's going on in North Carolina, let's introduce you to our panel of experts. They include former representative from Nash County, Gene Arnold, Chris Fitzsimon from NC Policy Watch, Syndicated columnist John Hood, and former state senator and former cabinet member and former on and on and on, Howard Lee. Well, there's so much to talk about in so little time this week. We're going to talk about the progress or lack thereof in the state budget. We'll examine the latest Medicaid reform discussions, and we'll talk about the proposal for a taxpayer bill of rights and the backlash it's created. Let's not waste another moment. More than 45 days after the start of the state's fiscal year, we still don't have a budget. But perhaps we're getting past the finger pointing and into some serious negotiations after the Senate agreed to take some of their more controversial policies out of the budget so as to focus on the actual spending plan. The public schools are about to begin. We're out of money for economic incentives, and the state is essentially marching in place. John, so we got another continuing resolution until August 31st. Despite the moves made by the Senate, is there any indication real progress is being made on resolving the budget? And if so, what's the prediction for when this plan might be adopted?
Well, I think there is real movement. And over the past week, there was a series of discussions, I think bilateral, plus some larger private meetings to try to bring the negotiation to a conclusion. There are many moving parts, and even pulling the pieces out and making them separate bills doesn't disentangle them from the budget negotiations. If you give on one thing, you hope to get on something else. Both sides claim the other side created the impasse. The Senate's argument is that the House simply spent way more money in its budget than the Senate or the governor was likely to accept. The House argued the Senate put too many non-budgetary items in the budget and delayed proceedings there. Both may have a point, but at this point I think they are actively talking, and I think they get to a budget deal fairly soon.
Howard, we saw something really unusual. All of us around this table have been watching budget negotiations through the years. Senate President Pro Tem actually called out House Appropriations Chair Nelson Dollar and indicated he was the hang-up in resolving this budget in so many words. You ever seen anything like that before?
You know, I thought that was really strange, and I couldn't figure out what was motivating that to occur. But no, I have not seen an appropriations chair called out in that fashion.
Gene, why has it seemed that there just wasn't any urgency to get this thing done until the last few days?
How many times have we talked about continuing resolutions in the budget that it was really policy that people were trying to sneak in, and it's always been money, money, money. I think that what's driving the budget now is the dollar amount. The Senate just does not want to spend over the 2.7% that they said they would.
The Senate said 2.7%. Nelson Dollar says he's seen some numbers that say 3.5%. Is that what this big argument is boiling down to?
Well, John referred to, I think there's two arguments. One is how much you spend, but I actually think that's easier to resolve in some ways because there's two numbers, and there's halfway in between, there's 40% in between. You can come to an agreement on the number. But John is right about the policy decisions being taken out of the budget doesn't mean they're not part of the budget debate. There's also things like the bond referendum, which we've talked about on this show before.
But that's not in the budget.
No, but it's also part of the negotiations. All these things are related. The thing we're going to talk about, the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, may be part of it. All the big pieces of legislation that passed now before the budget are part of the budget debate.
So, John, here we've got a situation where school bells are starting to ring in a week or so. School superintendents still don't know. They're going to have teacher assistants. They're not going to have teacher assistants. What are they going to do?
They're going to have to make do with the current level of funding, assuming that it's going forward. That's what the continuing resolution did. I think that they'll, for the most part, be able to plan. It is obviously not ideal. It's not the right way to get the budget passed. It needs to be earlier so the localities and school systems can adjust. But I don't think it's a crisis. It's a crisis if they don't resolve it and it goes into September.
Howard, this big business with the sales tax redistribution has really been sort of a hang-up here. Harry Brown, Senator Harry Brown from Onslow County, who has been the champion of this redistribution, decided he'd take it out of the budget. Further, he lowered it to a 50% redistribution among the counties instead of the 80% he originally had intended in the budget for redistribution. But there's a backlash that's been formed by a lot of municipalities across the state. Can he pull this thing off?
You know, I think it's going to be tough. I'm sure he has the votes and he could do it, but I see this as a redistribution of wealth, and I don't think the bigger counties are going to sit still and be quiet about this. I find that his compromise certainly has moved things closer.
But Gene, you were in the House, if I remember correctly, when we had, talking about compromise, we had this compromise in which we took Medicaid, responsibility for paying Medicaid away from the counties, and in turn came up with the current sales tax.
Yeah, and loaded them up. The driving force, as far as I'm concerned with what I see and hear, if you go east of the or west of the I-95, you got third world countries over there in those 40 counties that are in the east. And unless they give some kind of money to these counties, they're just going to wither and die. I think you'll see maybe a 20% going to these counties, a smaller number than 50-50. But I think it's time, and I think it's going to happen.
I think the big wild card in this is Governor McCrory, who said literally,
he said he was going to veto.
He said he would veto the old plan. He has not mentioned, he hasn't said anything what he's going to do about the renewed 50-50 plan that passed the Senate. I think that will have a say in how long this session lasts.
So it's over in the House now.
Right.
And what's the House going to do with it?
Well, interestingly, I would jump in here. I was interested this past week. Some House Democrats from rural areas actually joined with the Senate leaders at a rally or a protest, whatever you want to call it, demonstration in support of this. So this is not a strictly party line issue. It's a rural-urban issue, and that makes it even more complicated.
Plus, McCrory wants his roads, and I think he will do whatever he has to get his roads paved.
You guys think this is going to pass?
It's possible. The basic problem that the House and the governor have up on the 50-50, they had a very good argument against Harry Brown's original plan. The problem they've got with 50-50 is that was policy. That is how sales taxes...
Well, we understand why the rural counties are saying they deserve a larger cut than this. Why is it that the urban counties are resisting this?
Well, I think the urban counties feel very strongly, look, we're generating this revenue, and we have the populations, but we also have obligations.
The infrastructure.
That we have to keep up.
Yeah.
And I think most people are sympathetic with needing to do something for our smaller rural counties, but I think it's still going to be tough, and I think resistance will continue to be very strong.
And that money, if it is redistributed, is not going to build schools like someone had said earlier, but it is going to replace some of the dollars that the state piled onto the counties with the additional expenses.
Right. Well, we thank you for watching NC Spin on the air and on YouTube. Here's a reminder, there's much more on our website, ncspin.com, or NC Spin on Facebook. You'll find video footage not seen anywhere else, perspective pieces from our panel, and our weekly column. Get more balanced debate for the Old North State on ncspin.com, NC Spin on Facebook, or on Twitter at NC Spin Tweets. When we come back, we're going to talk about Medicaid reform.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
Phones are getting smarter, cars more efficient, TVs bigger and more stunning. Imagine the same innovation from agriculture. Meet the Plant Sciences Initiative at NC State, a proposed state-of-the-art research complex where world-class researchers will tackle agriculture's toughest challenges, like feeding the world's rapidly growing population while preserving natural resources for future generations. Join Farm Bureau and NC State in moving North Carolina to the forefront of ag research in the world. Visit keepaggrowing.org.
Clean transportation options can help you fuel what matters.
We're fueling what matters to us by converting our fleet of collection trucks over to compressed natural gas. It's a good, smart business decision, and having the air cleaner is something that benefits all the families that work with us.
We use biodiesel in our heavy equipment. We've got propane in a lot of our police cars, and we've really embraced the electric car. Join the city of Raleigh and fuel what matters.
To learn how you can fuel what matters, visit fuelwhatmatters.org.
The cost of everything has gone up dramatically over the last 75 years. With one exception, keeping electricity affordable. That's the power of your co-op membership. Learn more at togetherwesave.com.
North Carolina's Touchstone Energy Cooperatives, looking out for you.
We now return to NC Spin.
Even as the Department of Health and Human Services announced they ended last fiscal year with $130 million cash in the bank, the discussions about Medicaid reform have continued. One of the items the Senate took out of their budget plan included their notions of Medicaid reform instead of urging they be considered separately. Now, the Senate wants and passed a hybrid bill that would use managed care organizations as well as provider-led entities, but they still insist Medicaid be taken out of the Department of Health and Human Services. Gene, what do we know about the progress of this Medicaid reform? We know the Senate passed this bill. The House had originally not seemed very warm to it. Are they warming up now, particularly the idea of taking Medicaid out of the department?
I think that people are beginning, in both chambers, are beginning to realize that Health and Human Services is just too large an agency as it is now. And I think that a driving force with the Senate is that they do not want to be responsible for cost overruns. They just paid off a huge debt to the federal government, and they do not want that again. This Obamacare opened the door. It fell into their lap. And I don't think he'll...
But Chris, this business about taking Medicaid out of the department, how's that going to work? There's so many different tentacles between DHHS and Medicaid. How are they possibly going to separate it?
Well, it's going to be interesting. And how are they going to work together? I think that's a big question of people who think it's a bad idea, including, for a long time, Governor McCrory, although he hasn't said much about it.
But he had said he would veto that,
yeah,
too.
I don't think I'm not sure he'll veto it, but I think he's working behind the scenes not to let that be part of the final package.
John, the capitation amount, a set fee per patient per month, is that pretty much a done deal? Has everybody pretty much agreed to that?
Yes.
And that either MCOs and PLEs, whoever it is, have to assume the risk if it exceeds that amount?
Yes, there will be risk assumption by either commercial networks or provider-led networks or both. There will be capitation. This is the way Medicaid is done in most of the country. It's been done that way for many years. Some of the states have done it well, some of the states not as well. It's not surprising that they got to this point. It's surprising it took them this long to make the deal. As I said, this is standard practice in Medicaid in the United States. North Carolina is catching up.
Howard, we've been having this discussion about Medicaid reform now since Fido was a pup. I mean, is this going to be the year we're going to pass Medicaid reform?
Well, I think they're going to do something. I can't see specifically what the outcome will be. I think it would be a terrible mistake to take it out of the Department of Health and Human Services. But at the same time, some of the items that are on the table, it seems to me, makes it palatable enough that I believe we'll get some action.
Chris, one of the things that has been really intriguing about watching this is Community Care North Carolina CCNC has been a big part of the discussion, whether they've been involved in the discussions or not. They've been talked about anyway. It looks like this organization is just about imploding.
Well, it's not imploding. They're not going to let it continue. I mean, it's not imploding.
I know, but all the key people are leaving there.
Well, because the compromise is not going to allow CCNC to exist anymore. I mean, this isn't a decision they made. It was clear what's going to happen.
So they're pretty sure there's going to be no more CCNC?
Yes, I mean, the networks they've set up will be incorporated into some of these provider-led network and hospital networks, but as CCNC as we know it will not exist anymore.
So can the House go along with the Senate version, John?
I believe they have the basic parameters of a deal set. I think it's going to happen.
Really? This year?
Yeah.
I think I would do want to say that, and John referenced this, the state of Florida, for example, recently just has had terrible Medicaid cost overruns. They have a similar system to the one we're going to. Just because they're changing this doesn't mean that the Medicaid program is solved and we're going to save a lot of money.
Here's my big question out of all this. So we got these managed care organizations, which are primarily large insurance companies, and now we're going to have these provider-led entities, which are going to be consortiums of doctors and hospitals and so forth like that. Where's this all going to go? Are the managed care organizations ultimately just going to run out the PLEs?
It is just like we're seeing in the general market. It's kind of a flight to scale. If you're the biggest insurer, like a Blue Cross, then hospitals are going to band together so they can negotiate with you at a higher level of heft. That's essentially what's happening with the Medicaid caseload. It's not going to go to one provider. In fact, that was the problem. CCNC was a kind of a monopoly manager of these networks, and that's not where we're going anymore. So, look, there are lessons to be learned from other states. Again, most states have some version of this. Some states do it better than others. There have been insights that people have gleaned. I think, though it took a long time, I think they've come to the right place.
All right. After these messages, we're going to talk about the Constitution and a Taxpayer Bill of Rights.
NC Spin will return after these messages.
It's a fact. Patients who receive care in the medical home from a trusted family physician reduce healthcare costs through prevention, early detection, and affordable management of high-cost chronic diseases.
Every dollar invested in healthcare matters. Let's invest them wisely, building on North Carolina's medical home model. Better health begins with the medical home, a trusted family physician, the best return on our healthcare investment. Learn about the importance of medical homes at ournchealthcare.com.
Does your North Carolina business or organization have a story to tell? I'm Richard Campbell, and at Carolina Broadcasting and Publishing, we help tell stories that connect you to the people who will respond. We take the time to understand our clients' needs and what makes them unique. We craft their stories through the efficient use of words, images, and videos that resonate with their desired audience. We also know that a good story is incomplete without a call to action. On video, on air, online, and in print, from concept to final production, no one can help tell your story more effectively or affordably than we can. For special introductory offers, visit carolinabroadcasting.com or call 919-832-1416. Again, that's carolinabroadcasting.com. Let us help tell your story today.
We now return to NC Spin.
We've talked before on this show about a growing movement in the nation to call for a constitutional convention to require our Congress to maintain a balanced budget, much like North Carolina already has. But the Senate wants to take a step further and impose further state constitutional amendments they say they're calling a Taxpayer Bill of Rights, or TABOR. Now, under the legislation being considered, the individual income taxes would be capped at 5%. Another item would limit the growth on the state spending to the rate of population growth and inflation, and a third would establish an emergency reserve fund that could only be tapped by a 2/3 vote of the legislature. State Treasurer Janet Cowell strongly urged the legislature to defeat the measure. Howard, you've seen these TABOR proposals come before the legislature before. How serious is this effort? The Senate has passed it. What are the chances of it being passed into law?
Well, I hope very slim. I have seen these before, and I always found that they were pretty dangerous as far as I'm concerned. I've tried to determine the history of why this is coming forth so late in the session, because these are very heavy issues to be dealt with. And I'm thinking that since Senator Rucho voted against the budget the first time, and it's his bill, that the Senate is really kind of throwing him a pacifier by letting this bill pass out of the Senate. I hope the governor and the House will listen to the state treasurer and kill this legislation off. We should learn from history. After all, there are states that have passed these things and had to go back and redo them.
Senator Brent Jackson, who was the sponsor of this bill, took an unusual move this past week. He took all three of the elements and put them together into one bill, which the Senate passed. What was the rationale behind that? Does that make it more palatable?
Yes, that's the reverse of what we used to call catfish bills. You loaded them up so they'd sink to the bottom and wouldn't ever see them again. This is working in reverse. We tried this in '94, and it was very close to passing. I think it has a really good chance of being not only on the calendar, but I think it might even pass.
John, Janet Cowell says that the bond rating agencies have seen these types of things before, and they see this as being a financial threat to the state, and they don't look very favorably on them. Why is the Senate not listening to that?
Well, because she's overstating her case. We got to remember something about tax and expenditure limitations. They are common. There are 24 states that have some version of them, including North Carolina. North Carolina has all three of these things already. Remember, we have a statutory requirement for a rainy day fund. We have a statutory spending cap that was enacted
but
years
not
ago.
Constitutional.
I'm getting there.
Okay.
We have a statutory spending cap, though it's not very tight. It's a percentage of the personal income. and we have a constitutional requirement, a cap on the income tax, but it's up at 10%. This is a proposal to tighten all these three things that already exist in law and to make two of them statutory to constitutional. There are a number of states, including AAA bond rating states, that have one or more of these kinds of provisions. So the focus has been on the general concept and not on the particulars. I have objections about some of the particulars. The rainy day fund provision, I think, is structured in a way that might actually imperil our bond rating, but not the other provisions. And I think that if they worked on this a little bit longer and admittedly not bring it up in August but spent some more time on it, I think it has a lot of value. Now, I will say there has been, just because I said these are common and they've been around for decades, they've also been studied for decades. And the real issue is that they don't tend to work. Instead of thinking, oh, they're extreme and states can't spend any money, the actual practice is that most of these restraints don't work in the long run because politicians evade them. That's the problem.
Chris, what this legislature is essentially saying, as I understand it, is we don't like what previous legislatures have done, and we are afraid of what future legislatures might do, and the only people we really trust are ourselves.
Well, I think that's right, and we're binding the hands of legislators. Now, some of these things, some states do have spending limits. The so-called Taxpayer Bill of Rights, a constitutional amendment, that particular one that's in this, very close to this one's that's in this bill, only been adopted by Colorado. It's been, this similar thing has been proposed in 30 states. I have serious problems with what it'll do to North Carolina's investments in education, a lot of other things. I have just as serious problems with the process. Are you going to tell me that we're going to pass a bundle of three
constitutional... Didn't
go
through committee.
Well, it went through a committee in 20-minute debate, voice vote. If it's been studied forever, why not have a committee meeting and have experts talk about it? Let's have a robust debate before we change the Constitution and tie the hands of legislators.
I got two questions, and I got 30 seconds in time, and I'd like everybody to give me your answers to those two questions. Number one, is the House going to pass it? And number two, will the voters, assuming that it gets past the House and the governor doesn't veto it, will the voters approve it? John?
I don't think the governor has a role for constitutional amendments.
Oh, that's right, for constitutional amendments.
I would say I actually don't think this is going to be passed this year. I think it'll get more work done on it and probably move in a subsequent session.
Okay, Howard?
That's what I would think. I think the responsible heads will prevail in this, and we'll get more time to evaluate.
But this is just more controversy between the House and the Senate, isn't it?
Well, certainly it seems to be adding more fuel to the fire.
The voters will love it and would pass it in a heartbeat if they could ever get it on the calendar.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't see many responsible heads in Raleigh these days, but I think it probably will last until a short session. But I disagree with Gene. It's failed 2 or 3 times in Maine. The most recently was on the ballot in Florida. It failed, but I think 58% of the people in Florida voted against it. I think if it's on the ballot, it won't necessarily pass. I think it would be close.
Really?
Yep.
All right. Well, after these messages, we're going to ask the panel to tell us something we don't know.
NC Spin is brought to you in part by the North Carolina Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau and Agriculture. We keep North Carolina growing.
Hi, I'm Linda Loveland. I want the best for my kids. Feeding them foods they like within my budget is a priority. But what do we really know about these foods? North Carolina farmers and food experts give you a website to find it all. FeedTheDialogueNC.com, a place where moms like you and me can learn more about the foods we eat and the farmers that feed us. Check it out. Add your input and help feed the dialogue. Let's talk food at FeedTheDialogueNC.com.
Every year, North Carolina patients undergo 635,000 same-day surgeries. 72% of these surgeries are performed in our highest-cost hospital facilities, adding as much as $2,000 to every procedure. The state's outdated Certificate of Need law prevents competition from lower-cost, higher-quality same-day surgery centers, inflating healthcare costs and limiting patient choice. Tell state lawmakers it's time to lower healthcare costs now. It's time to make a simple fix to an outdated law, increasing patient choice and lowering healthcare costs now. You can help. Visit reformconnow.com and tell lawmakers it's time for a simple fix to an outdated law. It's time to lower healthcare costs now.
We now return to NC Spin.
Now we come around to the best part of the show, in my opinion, when we ask our panel to tell us something we don't know. They get to choose the topic and sound off on it for a few seconds. Chris Fitzsimon, so start with you.
We've talked on the show before about the bond issue, then the $2.8 billion bond and another, I think, $1.2 or $1.1 billion in transportation funding that the House passed. The Senate sent it to the Ways and Means Committee, which never meets, a signal that the Senate doesn't really like it. What I found really interesting and nobody's talking about, when we talked about the sales tax redistribution, is that bond issue the House passed has $500 million for local school construction in North Carolina. One of the arguments made by Senator Harry Brown why rural areas need more money is they can't build schools. He said one county in his district hadn't built a school in a generation. The House just gave them a bill that has $500 million, which makes it much easier for local districts to build schools, and the Senate apparently has no interest in taking it up. I think that there's a whole issue here that's happening about how we're going to help these poor areas who can't afford to build schools. Nobody's talking about it except the House bond, which doesn't do enough. I think that's going to be one of the biggest issues that we're going to see next session, 2016, is figuring out a way for school construction.
Wow. So you're assuming that the bond proposal is dead?
Well, no, I'm assuming that the Senator Apodaca has said we don't like that $500 million to build schools, so I'm assuming that part of it is dead.
All right. Gene, tell us something we don't know.
Very short and sweet. The state or the governor has lost General Tater and Dr. Wose. Look for 2 more resignations before the end of the year. Pretty firm source saying it's going to happen.
Well, I mean, the speculation is Lyons Gray is going to be one of them over in revenue.
Well, then make it 3.
Okay, so you know of 2 other ones. Okay, Howard Lee, tell us something we don't know.
I learned this week that a delegation is coming down from Virginia to take a real close look at our biotechnology center, because Virginia is very much interested in seeing if they can put something similar in that state. I've also learned that a number of states are smelling blood in the water and, like sharks, are beginning to circle around because they see that North Carolina, having zeroed out appropriations to the Biotechnology Center, will indeed leave an opening there that they can pounce on. I'm concerned. And I'm hoping that the legislature will wake up and realize that that is a golden cow sitting over there, and we should not take a risk on losing it.
And run those sharks away?
Let's run those sharks away.
John, tell us something we don't know.
Well, in the context of the budget discussion, it's important to think about what the economic outlook for North Carolina is in the current fiscal year that just started in July. We don't have a whole lot of data yet. But there is a survey done by the Federal Reserve of Richmond. They survey business executives and business leaders every month, the Carolinas Survey of Business. So this is North and South Carolina. Their July numbers came out. They were the highest in years, highest index value in years. So even though earlier in the year there was some weakness in some aspects of our labor market, July might turn out to be a really strong uptick.
And so there might be good news closing the year.
It's very possible.
Well, you've heard our spin on the issues of the day. To stay informed all during the week, give your feedback, read our weekly column. Be sure to visit our website, ncspin.com, or catch NC Spin on Facebook. And we hope you'll join us next week when we'll have more balanced debate for the Old North State. Until then, stay informed and watch out for the spin.
Join us next week and get the spin on issues facing our state.